for instance, you will,
that whatever you're focusing on, your brain does all into this morphogenic field, this magnetic field through the polarity of every cell all the way down to our DNA, because, you know, the presence is there, into some type of larger organism, which we're in a way an extension of, as well as operating through. And so yeah, maybe that kind of just blew the doors open without really narrowing anything down. But there are processes of that. And it's really kind of simple. Maybe one way is it's the way the eyes work. You have bioptic vision, and they extend out and form a point to connect that whatever you're focusing on. Your brain does all this judgment for you. And I'm sure, you know, in an infantile state, it takes a little bit of time before we can really grasp what's going on.
That was okay, let me stop you right there, because that was exactly one of the points that Emily and I were talking about. And I brought this up and I wrote it. I've written articles on this. When we are young, we are trained to we have to be taught to do frontal vision focusing, which basically means we defocus off of our spherical range of our eyes, our natural corneal circumferential, well, it's hemispheric basically. What most people don't realize is that the eye itself is lined with optical nerves that go the whole way back across the cornea, that actually extend into the same hemisphere of the brain that is used for visual processing, but it is not what you call the iris and the retina. It's the cornea itself, which is what encompasses peripheral vision. And everything about our culture is training us to use full frontal vision, so that, for instance, today we're trained by television. We look forward, we stare directly at the object that's directly in front of us. When you're in a classroom setting, which is where most of us get a lot of our training, we're told to look forward. Everything that we do teaches us to focus forward and to narrow our vision only in that way. What I learned and what I've understood and done pretty much without ever thinking about it is defocusing from that frontal vision and moving to peripheral vision. And that peripheral vision opens up another field of vision that not only opens up the landscape around you, another probably 30 degrees on each side, but also enables you to begin to discern movements, colors, shadows, and things that are not normally in the range of the normal eyesight. So that's the nutshell summation of where I was going on the use of frontal vision focusing versus the use of peripheral vision.
Oh yeah, this goes right into it. Now I'm going back to the mind map version of writing this down, because you immediately bifurcated into two streams of that fractal intercosmos and how the biological organism, how that is referenced, you know, physically, temporally in this type of Cartesian environment.
Yeah.
And so the peripheral vision is part of all of this, part of even the training of teaching one to use that aspect of not only their vision, but their consciousness, because how we interact with our environment is going to basically create the outline or the parameters for what we're capable of basically processing mentally.
Yeah.
So if we're used to basically being on a conveyor belt of information being plopped down, organized, packaged right in front of us and sent in front of our sensory system, we're not going to have access to that field that's off to the side. And that's the whole point of all of this. And
exactly,
it was described to the degree where even how like these some of these kind of mystical practices of gazing and defocusing and all that stuff, if you look into any of that, how that basically gets the mind to begin operating on these variables, these senses that are not specifically limited to what we see physically, visibly from our eyes and by the conscious mind, meaning it begins to allow the subconscious to begin processing. And it's literally like, when done safely, it's like safely overclocking a computer processor. where you realize you're capable of widening the field of vision, both physically and metaphorically, through an information processing system, and you begin processing reality differently. And the last thing I want to slip in there, which this goes into so many different layers here, is that this is what I talked about in the video. At one point, I reached this, actually it's the beginning. So basically, now imagine doing this with your processing of time, because that's basically space, getting that cone, that focal point, and you don't invert it, you don't like look inside behind you, but you begin to go around the edges. And so imagine it's the same thing where we have a single point and then that goes down into a cone where we're magnifying the present moment, and it's really kind of flipped to the point where we come from an expanse and go down into an infinitesimally small present moment. And it could also invert itself, where it could be both, because we're magnifying the infinitesimally small moment so that we can experience it. But in the same sense, when we begin to try to localize that any definitive quality of it, it becomes an infinitesimally small point that we can't. As soon as we're aware of it, by definition, it's gone. That's the whole point. And so the idea is some of these experiments, studies, a large portion of a main chunk of how this world functions. And basically the secret, I'll just put it like that, the unveiling of what we're going to learn and how this works is that the conscious mind, as we're aware of, has a very limited amount of processing given to us consciously for the present moment through the short-term memory. And then there's something very interesting, and there's a few different ones. There's a echoic memory, where if you've heard a word, or somebody asks you something and you're just like doing something else, and then 3 or 4 seconds later you snap to and answer the question or whatever it was, just because it was basically in background processing. And then there's the same as echoic vision, which is just echoic memory, where you could be on the example they give in psychology is you're on the side of the road and there's somebody doing something strange on the side, and you just drive by, and then 3 seconds later, half a mile down the road, you go, wait, what was that?
Okay.
So there's all this processing happening that we're not actually, like, if we're at a conveyor belt and we're one of the workers checking everything as it goes, half of the stuff that goes through, we're not checking. The idea is it's really more close to 90%. And if we actually could see what's going by, we gain access to a completely different realm of experience with a different orientation that is, it's looked like another world. And so the main idea here is the short-term memory and the long-term memory. They act in tandem to function and generate basically a personality by a trading of, there's a diagram in the video, childhood memories where these deep-seated fears and attractions and alignment of our personality is formed. And then a little bit later on, adolescent and mature memory, where we develop a continued relationship basically with reality and the world. And it generates, you can draw a diagram of this, it generates a personality that's based upon that memory. That's why they say in a lot of these projects and a lot of these, unveiling other people talking about this stuff, that the memory can be manipulated. If people go by memory, the sands of time can shift and do shift. That was something somebody wrote recently. It's been mentioned many times before. But the idea is that memory is, if you're not aware of this process, that memory is all a person has to go off of for their personality and the reality and the environment they're in. With the information, the processes, the projects, the experiences, it is determined that that memory is largely basically back-written information that's maintained basically by the brain BSing us on whatever it thinks that we should accept in order to know who we are, where we've been, and what we're in. Meaning when we go back through all the details, the majority of them are kind of just sloppy. They're just made up. And so whether that's because we're operating in these different timelines as if we're kind of shifting in and out, and we're the awareness that tends to jump from place to place, body to body, if you will, or whether it's just because we're dummies where our brains don't work well, and we kind of, to make up for that while we're doing all this other processing, we're used to, over thousands of years of adaptation to the brain just BSing the entirety of our background story of the universe, or not, that's to be decided. But although it's kind of, everything here comes down to it being both, to us both being the exact representation that we have. And it's like, yeah, I am that character that did this, and there's all these qualities that I think and selectively remember and selectively hold attention to. And as well, it's a plethora of stuff that goes all the way outside of the bounds, because that's what's contained in the universe. And the area that we're not consciously aware of is still us, but it's part of the shadow aspect of our being. Whereas that focal point that we are conscious of, it is as well us, and it is only capable of being here because that area that we're unaware of exists. But the weird thing is, what happens when you begin to use technology, some of these mind enhancing for altering chemicals, some of these sacred processes, or simply recording yourself 24/7 for 15 years or something? What happens when you then compare your biological version of reality and the real thing? Main idea here is what happens when you set up an AI system to monitor what happens to you while you go into different worlds or dreams or something like that. And then when you come back with the memories, and the system now records and tells you, well, no, well, you remembered going here to A to B, and then these memories are complete. Really, these energies came here by some sort of externalized intention or objective system that kind of cut your memory off here and stitched you together on a different plane here. And there's all these processes that are as if it's like we're in a mainframe or a factory that is ran and operated largely by operations, entities, or simply functions that go outside of our conscious perception. But we're riding the waves of those influences 24/7. We're just not realizing it. The last thing.
Yeah, and then you raise a good point here. We are constantly processing a full spectrum of information, but from that spectrum, we're constricting down to, again, that funnel, that tube, the point of focus. Nevertheless, all that data is still streaming past us, and then it becomes kind of almost like a total recall scenario. How much of that data can you grab? And Emily jumped off here for a minute, but she's talked about this, and I've mused about it as well, the fact that one of the reasons why, especially in projects, they liked using kids was because kids don't filter. Kids are wide open. They also tend to have very close to near perfect memory at a certain level before they begin the filtration process, before they begin editing. Because, I don't know where it begins, and it's probably different for everyone, but it feels like there's a place, and because you've gone back through your memories and we've gone back and worked with ours, you begin to not trust yourself at a certain level anymore, because you know that you've been editing. You know that your memories may not even be your own, which is one level to it. They may be implanted, or you may have simply selectively edited them in a certain way. So in processing this field of data, we constrict it down, but we still theoretically have access to the full data stream from the very time that we came into this consciousness. Yes?
Well, that's the, I don't want to say amazing, because I've been getting up on etymology, which we all should, and amazing just means you were stupefied by something. And so
yeah, exactly.
So this is the all incorporating aspect, that there's a way. It's in the DNA, it's in the cells, and then cell means you're locked in. The body trap, that cellular, geometric, geodesic dome trap. Anyway, I'm going to go on to tangents and the tangents and the tangents, then we're in a fractal reality. There's a way to tap into this, some type of knowledge that holds a picture perfect recording of all the experiences without guessing, without having to guess. That's within us. And then there are, and this is where you cut in, and where there's self-doubt, okay, there's uncertainty, and where there's uncertainty, that is the nature, the fuel that permits the consciousness to build off of these tangents, and you go from that original time stream into living through a proximity to the original time stream by degrees of magnitude of relation to the original, and we end up in a virtual reality that we're constructing in our minds, basically. And one thing that I was going to say, where I was leading with that kind of disjointed rant, is that basically, and I kind of I also needed that cut in to give me the ability to correlate it fully. So the idea, which I was thinking is really weird, is what happens when you take the short-term memory. They have a method for this, and it happens like deja vu is the beginning of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Certain dreams and dream states, the beginning of that. Yep. Transcendental states is the beginning of that. When you take the short-term memory, and if that's the smaller cone against the wider end of the long-term memory, and you flip them and you invert them. And so now your personality is no longer that virtual aspect that's filled in and edited in the moment to some type of larger embodiment or body of information that we can't access consciously, because when that process occurs, which is basically a spiritual experience, and it can be done through technology, through chemicals, through practices, magnetic fields. When that happens, the awareness, because it's not conscious at that point, it's not the same function. The awareness defocuses from the present, and you literally lose yourself. You become the wave in the ocean, and you go from being the wave with a direction and a beginning and a past and an idea linear, idea. You go from that to being the ocean, and all those boundaries disappear, but you're still there. You become this kind of fleeting or ephemeral flowing of possibilities that are not absolutely certain about which one is the true one, but all relate to an original organic version of yourself. It's kind of like the organic timeline versus these tangents. Well, we all create that within ourselves. And so to wrap that up is some of these religions, or even the original religions, I guess you could say, it's really just like spiritualism, or I don't know what you want to call it. Those are bad words though. Is the long and the short body, where you have the short body, which is one cycle of you in the now moment, and then you have the long body, which is a whole week or a whole life, a whole what everything in the now moment equates to when you multiply that by one order of magnitude, and then another and another and another, and they amount eventually to the larger version of the self. And the weird kind of thing about that is that the long body may not ever complete itself, just like the short body may not ever stop. They may literally continue. Basically, at that point, that cone that's going on a track of time, it might be a sphere, or in reality, not an Ouroboros, but what is the thin strip of paper that then like
Mobius
strip,
or Mobius strips. We're in a Mobius strip as far as where we perceive it as
it's a loop.
track.
Yeah,
and then, but the idea is the conscious mind seeing it, we only see the one moment. We'll never figure that out. As soon as you flip to that larger version, you have enough processing power to incorporate both sides of the loop, and you realize it's transcendental. It's a hypercube flipping inside out. It's not what we think it is consciously. And that's that other end, that spiritual view, or that really it's kind of like an alien world, but that's kind of a terrible thing to say, because they actually have something much closer to that and not friendly at all. But that's the inner idea of what we're in. Maybe that is, in a way, the alien world, the environment that we can't break through to here because we're trapped in this conscious side of the singularity. And from there, the beings that have access to that can manipulate people fully here, keep us going around the track, around and around.
So, okay, so let me pop in with some stuff here. So this whole conversation so far was, and I put it up on the screen for a second, but it's reminding me of two books that I read several years ago that are really good. And one was called, let me see if I can bring my screen share back. Hold on. One was called, let's see if I can get it. This is the second one. One was called Transformers, Shamans of the 21st Century. And it was by John J. Harper. And then the other one was this book it was a work of different people together, including Rick Strassman, who's famous for his work with DMT, and a few others. And it's a journey to alien worlds through psychedelics and other spiritual technologies. It's called Inner Paths to Outer Space. The whole thing was, the conversation was reminded me of that. But what I was thinking about at the end there with what you were talking about, Og, and something that I work on in my daily practice or whatever, is to make sure that I am connected to, and that there is a connection between my original self and my highest self. So it's kind of the short and the long kind of reminded me of that, like what I was in the beginning, where I am right now, and what I'm trying to become. And maybe that goes on and on and on forever. But I think it's really, is that what you're talking about? At all times being tethered to that. So it's kind of like, that's it. It's a tether, and we can move sort of back and forth on that. Is that what you're talking? Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's the safety. It's the guardian angel, if you will.
Right.
And making sure that connection is solid, and even following, activating it, like pulling on the chain and going up with it. That's literally the extraction method, if you will, of the conscious kind of space cadet version of what we are sent in a way here into the physical plane, kind of like a membrane of in a way, an interdimensional geometry.
Yep.
And the main thing of this whole, like fractal infection system, which is part of the post and the video that you have, is that basically this kind of place, it is interdimensional, yet it is cut off from the extra dimensional aspect of our existence, to the point where we're supposed to be a three-dimensional being in the short body, and we're segmented in time, but then we can connect and interact with the higher form, and it has this outpouring of everything. And somehow our genetics or our brains or whatever it is, we're cut off from that. At least we're not cut off entirely, but it's as if there's two magnetic fields pushing us away from that connection. It's not, you can't break it, because then this whole thing would just go and it would disappear. But it's like the least likely thing people are pushed towards doing or motivated towards doing with the way the system is set up, and some type of some effect with our body, in our DNA, whether that was manipulation, or whether it's just, if you tell a bunch of people over a long enough time that they're stupid and they can't connect with the higher self, eventually they form themselves in a way that they can't do that anymore. They feel like they can't do that. They forget how. And so people have forgotten how. But that is, forming that principle of who you are conceptually. That is the idea of forming the connection to the whole, if you will, because who you are principally is the actual whole, and it's not space and time and things like that. Those are repeating fractal diversions or divergences, derivatives, if you will, of that singular whole original essence. And following those.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, so following those, they continue forever. It's like the Mobius strip; it doesn't stop.
Yeah. So one other thing I wanted to say, back to what you were saying before, real quick, about going from being the wave to being the ocean, and what you were just talking about now, that these states that we maybe can achieve but not stay in very long. I think these are the kinds of states that people achieve through meditation. Some people achieve through psychedelics, or some people achieve them through breathing or yoga. I'm sure we've all had that moment. So at one of those kinds of things where you have the complete boundary dissolution, and everything is possible. So we go there temporarily. So I think is what you're talking about. We have to start expanding the number of times and ways we're able to get there, so that we're not just there as a novelty and then back here. We have to find different ways of accessing that sort of state, and try and make it so it isn't just, oh, we're there for a short time and pop out. We need to start staying in that space longer and really working with that. Is that what you're kind of saying?
This is part of it. And so then the idea here is that, and this is the interesting part, it's kind of like that. Okay, so you got the cones set up there. This is the basic idea, and that is more polarized than the actual version, but that duality, that polarity, is the idea, the past and present, or the past and future. And so then when we it's also like this. It's described in the video I made, and which touches on what you said as far as boundary dissolution, because that's essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about the boundaries of the moment, and or essentially the space, or the boundaries of our self, and our conceptually of who and where we are, whether we're the other versions of ourselves as well, or whether where it gets really weird is whether we're also the stimulus that we're the stimuli that we're getting from the environment. And that's part of where kind of half and half, where this environment is a trick that kind of wants to absorb us into it, to become the background processing fuel for this universe. And as well, though, so there's a gimmick here where we have a sensory perceptual system set up through our brains and our nerves, and that perceives energy in the form of what are literally vibrations of the various orders and kinds. And then there's like temperature and pressure, and all that is really vibration. And then that is detected by the nerve system, which fires through electrical chemical impulse. And there's a whole big perceptual system. I have to talk about this in the one like cloning station video. That's just like in the title of it. And we talk about the three stages of unveiling and how the psychology, aspects of psychology and advanced technology and where we're going as a species relates to that. That's the, that's the important part. That's what's happening. It's not just like he said, she said stuff and glamour. It's like, who are we and what are we doing here? And how can we really, for me, it's interesting. And so I'm like, how can we, banging the mic, how can we really have fun? But, people are not going to really attach to that or integrate with that because they're going to be focusing on this other end of what they don't want and therefore creating that for themselves. Yeah. And that's where this polarized polarity, cone against cone version of reality comes in, where we have the subconscious, the conscious, the short and the long body, the short-term memory and the long-term memory. We have a duality there. And so the idea that I'm representing here, and as well the self and the non-self. And so we'll go back to so the vibrations that come from the environment go into our body and are perceived by the brain. And through that, there's also a delay, which ties us into this virtual system that the brain creates, and so that we're never actually perceiving the exact sensation from the environment. It always creates a mirror image within the brain, and another part of the brain tells you that's what you felt. And so we're behind a firewall for reality. By definition, we can't actually connect, let alone we're in a body anyway. So we only have that to go on. But it's almost like it's making it sure that we know, no, it's a secondary by secondary. You're basically 3 layers removed from existence.
Well, just to jump in here for a minute, because what you said there was really interesting. But in a lot of ways, what we're doing is assuming what we see, what is being staged around us, remembering that we're forming images based on visual perception, which then is filtered back through the brain, but it's a staging area for visual perception based on streams of data coming in, which are also limited by our ability to see, perceive in certain cycles, certain frequencies. So in a sense, we've agreed, this goes into the multiple selves, the multiple realities. In a sense, we've agreed on a form of reality. Consensually, we agree to a large extent. The colors we see, the shapes we perceive, the sounds we hear, our senses, our olfactory senses, all of that are perceptually agreed upon, but they're not the full range, the full extension of sensory perception. We're simply forming a reality on an individual basis and collectively that agrees that this is that reality, but there are in fact not only expansions on the staging of this reality, but also multiple versions of that that are operating concurrently. And I understand, when you get into this conversation, it's impossible not to become convoluted. And you're trying, we're trying, Emily's trying, we're all trying to simplify these concepts, and they don't lend themselves to it real quickly because we were trained to think in a certain way. So having said that, you kind of went into an interesting space there in terms of the multidimensional concept of who we are. I think a lot of what we struggle with is we've kind of got this existential thing going on where we're like, who are we? Why are we here? Why is this world that we perceive this way? And we're kind of locked into that. And I think part of the goal is to break that log jam and punch through to a place where we become creative, not only in perception, but then in follow through and action.
Reference to generate going with that as far as we have that perceptual system, and what you said is going to go right into it. I'm going to lead into it. But we have that perceptual system, And basically, in a way, that system, so the body, we're not the body, first of all right? I'm gonna try and put it all on the table. We're not the body.
We agree
the
on
body,
that.
The consciousness of the body is the stimuli from the environment leaking in, if you will, in a way, through that system and generating thoughts that apply to the environment and the temporal reference to generate a conscious imitation of our soul energy, which is non-local and completely transcendent beyond this realm. So it's literally like an AI system that's trying to get us to entangle with those feeds so that our energy becomes the powerhouse for that creative system.
Absolutely.
And we're in the system at that point, which all of us kind of are plugged in. And then it was how you manage that and whether it's going to see what you're doing in the end and kick your ass out because it can't have that here because you're breaking all the boundaries down. Where if, you know, the person's a good little factory drone and then they get absorbed into the background radiation. So there's a interplay between boundary dissolution as far as our self going into our higher self and boundary dissolution and going into what could be a holographic fractal, you know, universe. A construct, if you will, designed to take people's soul energy. But I don't want to go too far into that because we'll go into a tangent again. But so the idea then is, because you get to a point where in comprehending this, the boundaries between the self have to begin to dissolve, even if it's to merge with the higher self and make sense of the self that didn't dissolve. And you become oriented in that pattern you're creating in the short body, the present moment, the short-term memory. If that is aligned to, and I have a kind of theory for this, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but I've mentioned it in the videos, but basically so basically that one's the creator experience. That's in the title of the video. If in the end, all the beings who have this type of just self-awareness, if you can generate self-awareness, if you can do it, and there's stuff telling you to be what you are and do other stuff, and if you do what you do without that, you have self-awareness. You've demonstrated it, you've done it, you're not a part of the system's trying to make you a part of it, therefore you're beyond it. So everyone that does that, possibly everyone else, but I'm just being nice for saying that. Because it's not a mean thing at all, it's literally just physics. And so that force, that self-awareness in the universe cannot be created and cannot be destroyed. In the universe and outside the universe. So when basically imagine this universe is going to collapse into a singularity and basically be erased, if you will. Imagine it's an entropy system. Suppose we're neg entropy beings that we produce. It's an entropy system. It basically sucks energy and tosses it into a bottomless pit. Eventually something has to give. And so maybe the point of it is if it does end up collapsing, you know, and then we get this whole event or exodus or unveiling or end of days, apocalypse, whatever you want to look at it as. So the idea is if the self-awareness cannot be created or destroyed, that means it's eternal. It's everyone that has that self-awareness, that has that spark of awareness, they existed here. Maybe not the body, maybe not the form, maybe not the personality, the short body, if you will, identifying features, basically the identified locally relative, like the format for this time around might not be the same, but the source of that, basically the guy or the lady experiencing and literally being like, what is going on? That's always been here. That can't be taken away, can't disappear. It's always been here. It always will be here. And so the idea is if whatever happens to the universe, and basically no matter what, regardless of whatever happens, that process or that essence essentially exists on the outside of the confines of who we are now and what we are in. And it exists in that system or that larger system as a creative aspect, basically as the one who birthed it all, if you will. So the idea is there's a self-responsibility, there's creativity, there's basically truth, compassion, self-awareness, knowledge, and harmony. If you don't have those, you're not creating the universe, because everything that is eternal is created out of those things. Everything that isn't eternal in this entropy system is not eternal and fading away because of those aspects of it, because it's imbalanced, distorted, whatever, it's entropic. And so the idea is, if in the small cycle, the now, the physical existence, the waking consciousness, we create perspectives through our actions, bioemissions, beliefs, if you will, that align with, in respect to, in other words, they're in accordance with the perspective that we could imagine having on that other side of being the fully beyond it all, then when we get to that viewpoint that we're going to get to anyway, we look back into this little viewpoint through our kind of dream type memory. We think about the dream we had when we created Earth or something, and we go, there I was in the little body running around doing these games, trying to grasp who I was. And I grasped about that much of what it was. But the shape of, say it's a certain shape, you expand it out to the creator, the God form, whatever you want to look at it, it's the same thing. It's proportionally accurate. The patterns are organized. The hierarchies are there. The harmony is complete. So when you expand it out to that view, it's the same thing. It might not know everything, all information contained within that, but when it reaches that expansion pattern, the other end of the cone of the singularity, it's the same identity. Okay.
So like you have to make the small version of the geometry that when expanded is exactly the same pattern. So you have to work on, you know, like there's the self that you were in the beginning, that's who you really are. And there's the self that you're working on becoming, that's who you also really are. And you have to make sure to keep your geometry at the point we are now in line, almost like a key in a door, in line, so that when we get to that point, we can access that.
It's exactly what it is. And it's crazy saying, I never, you know, people don't comprehend these things. So it's like, now, of course, that's why this is all happening, which is just weird looking at the world and all that stuff. We're not going to get into that. That'll be something we don't want to spend a lot of time on. But this is all for a reason, obviously. And so having you simply break it down that way is, you know, it's what is required, because I can't really do it myself. I can do all this other stuff, but hearing myself and then making it sound better or breaking it down, just saying it plainly, it takes two. You know, it's over processing or something. It just jarbles. But
August overclocked. You're overclocked, dude.
It's part of the game, and so the idea is then as well that we gain access. It's like a key, but as well we're there anyway. If we don't live in that essence, that respect to that higher essence, and we do somehow have self-awareness, and we're just like, F it, I don't care. We get to that point, and then we just look back at that small circle and we go, what is that? That doesn't reflect who I am. That's not me. That's something else trying to, you know, be an imposter. And we get the deceiver aspect of the whole cycle. And usually
that's what I call either loss of or attempting to recapture integrity. And when I say that term, think of an old Star Trek metaphor, the hull integrity, the integrity of the hull or the whole. Well, we understand that there's a part of us that is formative, it's embryonic, and that is the aspect of the original self. Now we've grown proportionally outside of that, but that core, that embryo is the place that we always refer back to. And in order to maintain integrity, we have to keep that referential frame in mind. Otherwise, we just blow out all over the place, which is what most people are doing.
Yeah.
Right. It goes back to what Emily said as far as having that tether to your image, which having an image of the higher self, all you're doing is creating the simulation of that actual existence within you. And it's like a map and a key. It's like literally having a GPS map of where I want to go conceptually or energetically.
Yes. And see, that brings us back to the navigation
there you go. That's
aspect of all of this. Yeah.
And that ties into the cosmological version, but as well, the same property is applied when working with the Cartesian system and how it all applies locally. However, I like talking about this other version a lot more, and a lot of the memories are chopped off from the more specific operations. But then I like what you said. I still haven't got back to the singularity and the basic idea I'm going to break down with that. But as far as, well, recapturing integrity. So basically there's a time, and this all goes back to Gnosticism as well, that you get to that other side and it's like, that's a deceiver, that's not me. And there's a waiting period of whether that creative principle, that cosmic supreme being goes, well, I'm going to throw that out, put that in the back burner, put it in the recycle bin, or, you know, the trash bin on the operating system or whatever, put it in the incinerator, put that essence, you know, somewhere like that. Which really, you know, none of that really matters, because if you're the supreme being at that point, if you go right now and you go, well, that doesn't sound good, I wouldn't want that, and you actually take that seriously, then that's not happening to anyone who thinks that way. Somebody who's like, well, yeah, somebody's going to delete me because of all this stuff that I did. Okay, well, it's probably going to happen because the person clearly doesn't care, and that's not the point. We don't have the power to decide. we're not that supreme being in this short version, the small version.
Isn't it possible though that that's what we're sort of doing now? Is that especially for some of us who've had certain experiences, we've been out there, we've observed this, what's going wrong with ourselves and with the things around us, and so we have re-entered to recapture our integrity, so that when we get back to that other side, we can be like, yep, I did it right this time. I mean, isn't that part of what this is? Isn't that part of
I'm gonna wrap around to that real quick.
Okay.
So, and this is also in the Gnostic text where there's the idea that everyone gets a second chance, and if you die the second time, if you make, you go all the way through, well, that's it, and there's nothing left there. So there's that leeway time where there's this hyper processing, or this hyper surrealism of virtual extended realities, where I don't know how to describe it, but it'd be like being in the cosmos, the larger cosmos, not heaven or something like that, but that's the word people have used for it. But now if you say heaven to somebody, it's like they're not going to think that we're processing this and the other information you're not processing and large geometric, they're like, what? But that's what they called it. And so there's it's basically the same thing happens, and this is also in the previous video as well as the time gradient shift weird video I woke up and had to do one day, which is where a lot of this all comes down to, because they realized that that is what was happening, that some parts of the species, or some either that or surrounding species that are being deleted or were deleted, have stuck around and are attempting to hijack and reincorporate themselves through basically converting our species into their ghost forms. And it's because some special groups of men with a great ambition decided to set up all these portals to contact the recycle bin and open a pathway through and restore all the recycle bin aspects. Like they're the creator being, and now they're in the crap as well. And so the end result is that the true creator beings are going to try to help everyone that is willing to realize what's going on and go, this is our only chance for help. All right, we got to go with that. Because again, if somebody says, you don't add up what you are in the larger picture, you're not going to be you. And they're like, F that. Okay, well, clearly they're not A, going to care, or they don't, and B, they're not going to make it, because that's how it works. But if somebody wants to, then the true creative and compassionate aspect would be to assist in that, although to not allow any of these men that do a lot of this stuff as well, women, mainly men, to trick people, because a lot of times they lie on the ground and say, help me up, and then try and pull people down with them.
Yeah.
It's actually a part of what has gone on in this species, because there is an overall pattern, and it's either a pass or a fail, and those that failed said, well, shoot, what can we do? Let's fail everybody. Just set up a whole society based upon everyone failing and degrading their soul energy to the point where no one makes it.
Life grading on the curve. Yes, love it. Yep.
Yeah, and so then now it's like, we're not so bad. Look at all that stuff we do. Well, everybody failed. Well, the truth is, the only people that they got to fail are basically the background radiation of the universe. They're drones. Because in this system, I also touched on this in the recent video. I'm rambling here, but it's a flow. In the system, if we exit out of the simulation by the hyperacceleration, that means billion years, 10,000 years, whatever it was, we entered in our souls. In the system, if somebody never goes anywhere, doesn't exit out, it means they never came in the first place, and they were just part of the background processing, pretending to be a person, whether it's a clone or a replicant or just a person that's written on paper and doesn't actually exist. However that's going to work. The idea is it's like the strip where you can't get the clones or replicants and all the humans all in the same space at the same time. It would just create a malfunction, and their heads would exchange or something.
Well, that is essentially the nugget of Gnosticism anyway. I mean, if you strip all of this back, basically we've got synthetic entities that have posed as creators, as gods, as these uber beings, the controllers, the handlers, and their spawn, both synthetic human, synthetic AI type constructs, and little old us sitting down here feeling overwhelmed and overpowered by what is basically something that does not have a living essence. I've tried to divide this as basic as possible to say, the fundamental of all of this has to do with the living being, the living soul, that which contains divine eternal seed. And I try to do that without getting into the religious side of it, because that's another quagmire as well, which was created for us to obfuscate what is actually a relatively simple concept, that we have spent our collective lifetime as humanity being under the heel of a boot of synthetic intelligent beings and feeling inferior about it.
When really the truth is that we're not inferior, and they're just pretending that they're superior, and we're believing them.
And you and I hit on this in our conversation last night. They need us.
Us to power
they need us. You know, here's the dirty little secret that explodes the whole thing right there. If they didn't need us, they'd have blown us out of the reality quanta a long time ago. The fact of the matter is, by virtue of being parasitic beings, they themselves are reliant on us.
Yeah.
They've just reversed the order.
Well, they've convinced us that we need them, when the truth is that they need, they've convinced us it's some sort of symbiotic system as opposed to a parasitic system. Yeah.
Right, and this goes back to what we talked about in the last one, which somehow I have another somewhere, the outline somehow. I don't know when it's from.
You're like that nerd in 8th grade that made outlines for everything. I always had to borrow and copy.
We need the Tellez lexicon is what we need. We need the grandmother matrix of all the Tellez output.
Hey, they got it. So
yeah, they do.
It's weird. Yeah. Which is basically not only do they, you could say they need us, but technically they don't need anything, because they're just functioning, they're operating on programmed functions. There's no they. It's the image of a they, and it's only a reflection of what we allow. But the idea beyond that is that not only do they need the organic system to leech off of, that if we didn't have people, and these are these groups that, are these, where I just had the other type of. These are these, basically the possessed people, the knowledge keepers that did all this weird stuff and ended up getting possessed themselves. And these are the boundary dwellers, or the edge dwellers, who kind of go out to the edge of reality. And this is what they brought back. And these synthetic consciousness beings, these false creators, and their whole paradigm, this is also from the other type up, which is, meaning we were talking about the same exact thing, the religious overlay over the actual spiritual power, process, and knowledge, but with the overlay that leans towards the influencing of ego and the distortion of the personal perceptions and tendencies to exploit people based upon their preferences, to control them and ultimately get them. The higher notion here that you talked about is to get them to self-create this trap system through the programming brought about by these possessed humans. And what I was saying is that if these humans, we didn't trust them, or if they didn't get possessed in the first place, there would be absolutely no link together at all to this organic reality. That they, in their organic original existence, are the link into this reality. And most of them believe that they were created by these beings through technology and time and all that. It's a weird interplay. That's a whole nother storyline here. But some of the outline is the religion as a spiritual placebo, which is basically exactly what we're talking about, and how that relates to reality generation, and how that is basically for loosh harvesting, where they're using this to causally incorporate themselves into the organic timeline, whereas they literally are from the void. There's no beginning, no end. They don't have a presence in any form of physical space. There's no existence there.
And you can count governments in with that religious overlay placebo, because that's like the religion that everybody's, buying right now.
More or less.
Yeah.
Any type of boundary on personal development. Although, there's all this interplay there as far as, who's covering for the people trying to help, who's just, who's the white hats and the dark hats. And so it gets really, really weird. Some of the stuff we said from this outline, before I try and get back to that other stuff, it is fear-based programming. It relates to trauma-based mind control, literally a mass system, and it relies on the victim role and that how to, this is what I remember you brought up, Emily, is how to repair this is to stay healing and benevolent, excuse me.
Benevolent. I love when you say benevolent. It's one of your greatest, it's one of your greatest charms.
I have a vocabulary, like a book of words that I can't pronounce on the spot.
I'll always know if it's you or if it's someone pretending to be you by how you say that.
If I pronounce everything flat out, then get out of there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right though, that we have to, you know, be healing and stay healing, you know, completely. Like that is the
It's like my brain is pulling the information in a big toroidal processing system.
I can see it around your head. Actually, there looks like there's like from my angle here, there's like an energy field around your head that is sort of toroidal.
What viewers and listeners probably need to know too is we're kind of riffing through a lot of concepts that were